What was the strange and bizarre training that Sidious underwent with Darth Plagueis the Wise? Greetings, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. Every Sith Lord, no matter how powerful, had to begin from somewhere, and for most of them, that was learning the secrets of the dark side from a master. The same is true for one Sidious, who would become the Emperor of the Galaxy, and is known for training 3 of the most dangerous Sith apprentices that have ever lived. But the way in which Palpatine himself initially learned the dark side is somewhat shrouded in mystery. We know that he was taught of the Sith mostly by his own master in Darth Plagueis, but little else is known about the specifics of Palpatine's training. Unlike Jedi training, Sith training, particularly during the Rule of Two, was not regimented. Darth Bane saw to it that each master would train their apprentice in whatever methods they saw fit. This means that each apprentice received a wholly unique education on the dark side from a unique master, in an effort to allow the Rule of Two to evolve with the rest of the galaxy and not grow stagnated and old, bogged down by tradition. In Palpatine's case, the very few times that we actually get to see him training with Plagueis are in very strange situations, and is unlike any other Sith training that we've seen before. Out of the deepest and innermost monster within Palpatine, Plagueis was able to rip that creature to the surface, and in doing so, created one of, if not the most powerful and vile Dark Lord of the Sith that has ever lived. So join us today as we open a holocron and learn about the bizarre and the brutal training of one Darth Sidious. Before we begin, we have received a terrible vision. Many who use our archives are not yet subscribed, so if you've been enjoying the daily Star Wars holocron uploads, reach out and crush that subscribe button. It is your destiny. Palpatine's journey into Sithhood began whenever he finally lost control and murdered his entire family brutally using the Force, wielding it like a blunt instrument of death. Afterwards, Plagueis pulled some strings in order to have the entire deed covered up, and he inducted Sidious formally into the Order of the Sith. But his real training would not begin until a month later, when Plagueis took his new apprentice to his homeworld of Mygeeto. The place where Plagueis grew up was a frigid world and an unforgiving climate. A perpetual snowstorm covered the city tundra where Plagueis and Sidious now stood. The old moon, having grown up on this planet, was completely acclimated to its harsh weather. But of course Palpatine, who had grown up on the lush planet of Naboo, was now suffering in the cold. Plagueis had him only wearing a thin envirosuit, and nothing else to protect him from the sub-zero temperatures and the howling wind. All of this was for Plagueis to administer the first lesson of the dark side to Sidious, the proper differences between how the Sith use the Force and how the Jedi use it. As they stand there in the blizzard, Plagueis says this: "If you were a species acclimated to these conditions, I would have brought you instead to a desert world. If you were an aquatic being, I would have stranded you on dry land. The divide between the Sith and the Jedi has less to do with the distinction between the darkness or the presence of the light than between, in your case, naked, cold, and the presence of warmth, between distress and comfort, entropy and predictability." Plagueis teaches Palpatine the struggle that all Sith must endure in order to survive. But not only that, make themselves attractive to the dark side. Plagueis mentions how Sidious's blood is almost frozen, and the more time they spend on the tundra, the closer Sidious ventures to death. This was the point of being on Mygeeto in the first of their lessons, so that Sidious would bring himself close to death, so as not to succumb to the power of the dark side and its whisper. The dark side and death work together as one and the same. To seize control of the dark side though, and to use it to bring himself back to life, was something only a Sith Lord could do. This directly parallels the first steps into the dark side that the ancient Sith Exar Kun once took. On the world of Korriban many thousands of years ago, Exar found himself fallen into a rocky crevice, and trapped underneath many pounds of rubble and debris. Here, it was only by calling upon the dark side of the Force to free himself and to heal his body that Exar was able to escape with his life, using death to promote his own life, making the dark side serve you. From that point forward, the Jedi Exar Kun was no more, and he began his slippery descent into madness, but also to power. This idea of grabbing hold of the dark side in order to survive is the essence of becoming a Sith, and the very reason that Sidious was now suffering in this brutal weather. To torture him further, Plagueis then tears open the front of Sidious's suit, making him that much more exposed to the terrible cold, before forcing his apprentice to tell him again how he murdered his family. Plagueis had been having Sidious relive that moment over and over again in strenuous detail. Repeatedly doing this, Sidious recalled his murderous act without emotion. Plagueis revealed that this was in an effort to strip him of remorse and to tear away at the scraps of compassion, both of which are useless to the Sith. But now we come to Palpatine's first great task: to ascend the sheer slope of a mountain with nothing but his bare hands. For weeks, Sidious had attempted to climb his way up. He was deprived of sleep, food, and water, not allowed to have any rest or sustenance whatsoever until the task was complete. Anytime he fell, he would suffer the injuries that came from the falling, the sheer mountain slope dragging him downward, and then the Dark Lord would need to pick himself up. Try again. All the while, Plagueis sat on the top, in a comfortable, flat outcropping on the mountain, meditating and waiting for his apprentice to join him. The entire time he taunted Palpatine, encouraging his hatred, while also lecturing him, teaching him of the future of the Rule of Two and its great past. Sidious at this moment was trying not to die, thinking of nothing but strangling the life out of Plagueis. Palpatine had gone from a comfortable, aristocratic lifestyle to now the life of Sidious, forced to call upon the Force in a way that he had never done so before, simply to sustain life. Finally, once reaching the top, Palpatine was so full of hatred that he attempted to leap at Plagueis' throat, only to pass through him and land on the ground. Either the moon had moved so fast, either Plagueis had moved so fast that Sidious could not perceive his motion, or this was an illusion. His next attempt to attack his master was also easily repelled, as he simply used the Force to fling Sidious to the ground. Sidious was making progress, but not fast enough for Plagueis' liking, so he moved on quickly to the second lesson: sheer torture. In the snowy tundra, still deprived of food and sleep, Sidious was tormented by Plagueis. Plagueis repeatedly thrashed at the boy with his lightsaber. It wasn't enough to actually cut anything off or cause serious injury, but just enough to inflict burns and a terrible pain on Palpatine. Sidious was barely alive, forced to crawl his way across the tundra, and being powerless to do anything else but take upon him the agony. Plagueis' explanation for this training was a simple one. A Sith apprentice is the antithesis of a Jedi youngling, nurtured, comfortable in the temple, battling a floating remote with a training lightsaber. A Sith acquaints himself with pain from the start and inflicts it as well. A Sith goes for the throat, just as you did on your family's starship, Palpatine. According to the Dark Lord, one of the first lessons a Sith must learn is pain. We've seen Sidious torture his apprentices endlessly, but now we know the same once happened to him as well, and that he learned to grow stronger from it. Plagueis cut no corners when it came to this part of training. Palpatine had been raised with a silver spoon in his mouth on one of the most comfortable, wealthy planets in the galaxy. Palpatine had everything handed to him, and a father to bail him out of any trouble that he ever got himself into. Palpatine didn't know the meaning of struggle or the meaning of injustice. He had no idea what real pain was like. He had never felt it before, and because of that, he would need to survive it now, to claw himself from the brink. The absolute brutality of Palpatine's first months as Darth Sidious was to teach him a need to satisfy vengeance, a great hunger for it, and that his thirst would only be satiated with the blood of his enemies, and that he would only find rest when the Sith sat upon the throne of the galaxy. Out in the tundra and on the slope of the icy cliff, wealth, status, and prestige meant nothing. It was him, and it was the dark side. When at the mercy of his master's blade, Palpatine could not bargain or buy his way out of the torment. He would need to deal with it, focus on it, obsess over it. These are the first lessons of Darth Plagueis. The next time we actually get to directly see Plagueis and Palpatine train together would be 11 years after this event, when we get by far the strangest moment in Palpatine's entire training as a Sith Lord. On the low-gravity world of Buoyant, Sidious and Plagueis were chasing a herd of animals. In each of their hands was a vibroblade, as they had killed many animals before these that they now pursued. Already covered in blood, the two Sith were acting as wild predators, the dark side flowing through them naturally. As the Dark Lords gave chase, Plagueis instructed Sidious further on how to make himself irresistible to the dark side, and the best way to capture prey, to use the dark side to dominate their mind, and to summon them towards himself. Sidious did so, focusing on one specific animal and bringing it closer to him before extinguishing its life with the vibroblade. After slaughtering the creature, Plagueis had him move on to the next, embracing the predatory status of Sidious. The Sith at their core are predators. But what is so odd about this training when we look at Sidious and Plagueis is that they are upstanding fellows with an elegant appearance. We expect Plagueis to have taught Sidious in a more ritualistic fashion somewhere deep within a Sith temple, and it's very likely that they did do this. But this training was primal, which speaks to the hidden monster within both of these dark men. There is a raw, savage side to Sidious, a deep contrast to his outwardly distinguished demeanor. Darth Plagueis tells his apprentice that while the bloodlust of Sidious is good, that they are not butchers like the Sith of old. They are the architects of the future, and yet, Plagueis cultivates the viciousness within his apprentice, telling him only to unleash it when violence suits the purpose of the plan. Amazingly, we see that this comes out whenever Sidious enters combat with Yoda or Windu. Sidious howls, snarls, and gnashes his teeth like a beast. He is a beast. He fights with both wildness and precision. All of this due to a swirling storm of darkness, a darkness that hides the monster inside of Palpatine at all times. He is the monster. Another fascinating aspect about the apprenticeship of Sidious is their actual training in lightsaber combat, as this happened much later in the training. 12 years from the start of Palpatine's training would be the time when Plagueis finally permitted him to use a lightsaber. Once he constructed one, Plagueis presumably taught Sidious all 7 forms of lightsaber combat. But this is not the type of training that is worth showing. What is worth showing is one of Sidious's exams of the planet of Hypori. Plagueis had pulled some strings as his alter ego as Higo Damask in order to get Wat Tambor to provide them with battle droids and a fabricated cityscape. Since Hypori was uninhabited, Sidious and Plagueis could use their lightsabers in the open without concern of discovery. But here, the roles were reversed. Instead of being predators hunting down a pack of animals, the Sith were the prey, being forced to take on nearly 200 battle droids. Standing back to back, lightsabers drawn, the Dark Warriors repelled wave upon wave of attackers. Plagueis forced Sidious to endure practical combat, teaching him how to quickly ascertain and memorize whatever weapon that the enemy was using. Plagueis taught Palpatine to defeat the weapon before defeating its wielder. Sidious deflected blaster bolts and hacked his way through endless droids as his master monologued and taught, teaching him to provide information and serving as a distraction to Palpatine to make the challenge more difficult. It was after this that Plagueis would give a long lecture from where many of our finest information about the dark side originates, teachings that we have pined over here at the channel. Interestingly though, Sidious expressed disinterest. He was bored with practical combat knowledge and was far more focused on wanting to learn the powerful secrets of dark side abilities, not combat. Palpatine wanted to know why they spent time training on backwater worlds instead of the ancient Sith worlds, which was their birthright. He had longed to see Korriban, Ziost, and Yavin 4. But Plagueis explained that the Sith had never ventured there because there was simply nothing left. He knew that Palpatine imagined that there would be some lingering old power, but instead, the only thing that lingered was Jedi, treasure hunters, and old legends. Plagueis chid Sidious for wanting academic knowledge of the ancient Sith, believing that those Sith were dead, that they failed at their task, and the task at hand would only be accomplished by the present. We find this moment truly fascinating, as even though Plagueis never spent a lot of time with Sidious on these ancient traditional worlds, we know that Sidious would end up becoming fascinated by them after Plagueis' death, and that Palpatine visited them regularly, and would even take his own apprentices on field trips to them, such as when he took a very young Maul to Malachor. Unfortunately though, this would be the last time we ever see Plagueis and Sidious really train, as much of Sidious's pursuit of knowledge would be handled by himself personally. His own pursuit of education through books, scrolls, and holocrons, diving into them wherever possible. but Plagueis did not allow him to look into the knowledge of the ancient Sith. In Plagueis' opinion, the ancient Sith all interpreted the dark side and the Sith Order in their own way, and Plagueis wanted to show Sidious to form his own opinions first, without being influenced by the long-dead ancients. Plagueis always wanted to focus on the present and the future, rather than obsess over the long-dead past. But from what we know from Palpatine's own writings, that he did not agree with everything his master taught him. Just like with the temples, we know that Sidious spent a great deal of time learning from the old Sith Lords. He studied and respected many of them, while also collecting Sith trinkets as a hobby. He would have found Palpatine's vast collection to be quaint, and likely at worst, a waste of time. I can just picture Palpatine glaring at Plagueis as the Dark Lord holds an ancient holocron and chastises Palpatine about the ancient Sith. But there is brilliance in the way that Plagueis trained Palpatine. Anything and everything that he taught his apprentice was always hands-on with immediate application. From what we gather from this strange series of training exercises, Plagueis remained true to his penchant for practicality, but he also talked a lot. There are very few moments in the training where Plagueis does not go on about how the rule of two is important, but how he is also the end of it, constantly talking about Palpatine's role as his apprentice, and the purpose of the Sith as opposed to the Jedi. Plagueis would lecture, as Sidious put himself through body-breaking agony to fulfill whatever cruel and unusual punishment that his master called. As said before, this was to sharpen Palpatine's mind, feed the primal monster within, and above all else, to connect him with the dark side in a way that no other being could. And it was from this that Sidious became one of the most powerful Lords of the Sith. He didn't just take a hold of that power, but the dark side saw him as addicting. The dark side saw that he was willing to go through anything to get that power. The dark side called to Sidious, and Sidious called back. And this is how he achieved the power that very few Sith ever would. Maybe only other one Sith would, in the Emperor Vitiate. But of course that is a tale for another day. But this was the bizarre, and yet frighteningly enlightening training of Darth Plagueis the Wise and Darth Sidious the Cruel. What did you think of this unique way of Sith training? How it differed from the training of the ancients? And how Plagueis' brilliance created the most powerful Sith Lord that has ever lived? As always, my friends and fellow students of the Force, thank you so much for indulging today in our archives and our old holocrons. We upload daily Star Wars lore if you found this video enjoyable. And as always, be kind, and may the Force be with you.